Welcome to this meeting of the Audit and Governance Committee of Herefordshire Council, being held on Friday, the 30th of July 2021. For those present in the meeting room, if the fire alarm sounds, please leave the building by the nearest exit and make your way to the fire assembly point in the car park. The agenda papers and other relevant information for this meeting are available for public viewing on the Herefordshire Council website. The Council is streaming this meeting live on the Herefordshire Council YouTube channel and is making a recording. To ensure that recording quality is maintained, please speak as clearly as possible and keep background noise to a minimum. Please ensure that mobile phones and other devices are turned to silent. Something I'm just doing at the moment. Others are permitted to film, photograph and record public meetings, providing it does not disrupt the business of the meeting. If there are any members of the public present who do not wish to be filmed or photographed, please raise your hand now so that any such person filming or photographing may be made aware. Only committee members present in the meeting room may vote. We have a number of people in attendance as virtual participants. Can I request that they use the raise hand function within the system if they wish to contribute, and the clerk will alert me to that action. Thank you. So I'll now move to item number 1, apologies for absence. And I understand apologies have been received from Councillors Bolter and Matthews. Are there any other apologies? No other apologies. Name substitutes. Councillor Summers is substituting for Councillor Bolter and Councillor Bowen is substituting for Councillor Matthews. Item number 3, declarations of interest. Do any members wish to declare any Schedule 1, Schedule 2 or any other interests in any agenda item? No. In this case, we'll move to item 4, minutes. Minutes of meeting held on the 28th of June 2021 are included in the agenda at pages 9 to 16 for approval. No matters of accuracy have been notified to the monitoring officer. Are you content that I sign the minutes as an accurate record? Indication of hands, thank you. The committee's action log is attached to the minutes. Do any members wish to raise any questions on the action log? I'll give you a moment to find that on the electronic copy. Councillor Polderson.
I don't want to raise any particular point, but I just wanted to illustrate the fact that the changes where with the introduction of the red text and blue text I found extremely helpful. So I appreciate the folks making those changes.
I think the document now is much more readable and points and the observation can be seen very clearly. Any other comments? Thank you. In that case, we will move to questions from members of the public. I believe no questions have been received from members of the public on this occasion. And item number 6, questions from councillors. No questions have been received from councillors on this occasion. So that leads us on to agenda item 7. The external audit findings report, and we're considering the external auditor's finding report for the year ended 31st March 2020. And I'll ask John Roberts, the engagement lead from Grant Fund, who's present in the meeting, to comment on the report and draw our attention to any findings that he thinks worthy of special attention from us.
Okay, thank you, Chair, and good morning, everyone. Nice to actually be at this meeting in person today. The report that you have before you, starting on page 21 of your pack, is our audit findings report for the 2019-20 audit year. It's coming to you In this one, later than we would normally do. And the reasons for that are the issues around the value for money audit that I'll expand on shortly. So the audit, the substantial audit of the accounts was actually completed last year. It was completed well before the November timescale that we were working to. So, the council's process for producing its accounts had worked very well. Even though we were in a lockdown year, but we did need the extra time that the Secretary of State had granted for the financial statements audit work to be undertaken. However, because a number of significant value for money issues were still in progress, we couldn't actually give our opinion on the financial statements at that time. We had to wait until we completed the whole audit. And the Code of Audit Practice, we complete what's called an integrated audit. So both the accounts work that we do and the value for money work that we do integrate together. And you'd see that in terms of some of the accounting changes that have been made around post-balance sheet event disclosures, around the decision on the bypass, which is reflected in our value for money audit. So that was the right course of action for us to delay giving our accounts opinion until we completed our value for money work. The report, however, we didn't want to delay communicating with members, so we'd already reported to you our interim findings. Now, those interim findings are the black text in this document, so I don't believe it's appropriate to actually go through all of that again. That's already been considered by the committee, so it's probably not even right for the committee to reconsider things that it has already considered. But what I did do in this document is try to be very clear about what's new. And what's new is the red text. We are proposing to qualify our value for money conclusion for the reasons set out in the report. That's a significant thing. That's a significant thing for the committee to be aware of. And you will see that the issues upon which we based that qualification were significant issues. There are also issues that the council has itself been dealing with, and the timing of those issues, particularly around the capital programme, was the reason why we couldn't conclude the value for money work at the time of completing our financial statements work. So on the issues themselves, let me take you to the value for money section. We picked up a number of risks that we'd followed up in our value for money work. In most of those areas, we were comfortable, and we issue what's called an except for qualification. So what we are saying in our value for money report is, in all areas that we considered, except for these two specific areas, we were satisfied that the council had adequate arrangements. However, by inference then, those areas that we do qualify on, we are saying that we don't think the council had adequate arrangements in place. Those two issues are set out on pages 42 and 43 when it's in terms of the council's capital programme, particularly around highways and the way that's functioned. And I believe that's been subject of recent cabinet reports. And also on pages 45, or page 45, which deals with the issue around children's services, where we reflect on a High Court judgment that has been made against the council. So those are the significant areas of findings that's led to qualified value for money reports. What the council will have is a series of recommendations made by various bodies internally and externally, in the case of children's services, as the inspectorates start to sort of bring their attention to the council's arrangements. So we didn't raise specific recommendations around those areas ourselves, but the recommendation that we would make to this committee is clearly to monitor now how the council responds to those areas. You'll see them reflected in our audit plan for the following year. So again, this will be something that we will also be looking closely at. But it's certainly very relevant, I believe, that for this committee to be tracking the council's response in these areas. I'm also pleased to say that there's been a fairly long-standing issue that the council has been dealing with. It's sort of confidential issue, but it's an issue that's prevented us from giving our certificate of completion on previous year's audits. As a result of the council now addressing that issue, we are able to close those certificates down as well. So that, I think, is a good piece of progress there. I did want to talk to you also about audit fees. And fees and variations are set out on page 53 and fully explained on page 54. Now, the subject of audit fees is has been well debated. The contracts that we originally signed, and we don't have a contract with the council, that might be actually unexpected to members. Our contract is with an organisation called Public Sector Audit Appointments Limited that let the contracts for local government audits across the country. And Public Sector Audit Appointments Limited also sets the what's called the scale fee and is the statutory body for determining fee variations. So there's a very well established contractual process that we go through in terms of dealing with those fee variations through PSAA. And when PSAA has determined the fee, it becomes the legal fee that the council is then required to pay. When we entered into our contracts with PSAA, it was in the first quarter of 2017. Since then, there's been a number of high-profile audit issues or audit failures, you could say. Well publicised around Carillion, British Home Stores, Thomas Cook, Patisserie Valerie, all very high profile in the media, but also high profile with government regulators. So audit has basically changed since the days that we priced our original tenders. And the regulator now expects audits to be much bigger, much more technical, much more comprehensive to deliver the rigour and quality that the regulators and government expects. And the public sector is no exception. So we now do a lot more work than we originally envisaged at the time of tendering. We break that down for your information in this report, and you'll see it in our audit plan for next year. Fees then, following this committee, the committee is asked to note the fees. You don't have a role in terms of authorising them, but you're actually very welcome to comment on them. But the actual process then goes into PSAA's fee determination process, and they will want to see evidence from us to support any variations that we propose, including they have right of access to our files, right of access to our time ledgers, all sorts of things like that. So you can, as a committee, be reassured that the body that is contractually responsible for setting fees will have a very close look at what we are proposing in terms of the charges for yourself, both in this audit year, but also in the audit plan that's later on in the agenda. And I'm happy to take any questions, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Roberts. Any questions from committee members? Councillor Jim.
Presumably we're using these microphones, are we?
If you would please. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. I've got a few, so I suspect there may be others who've got questions as well. So I'll go with a few and then we'll see what happens thereafter. First of all, John, can I say a big thank you for putting in the explanations. As you know, I've queried with you in the past what on earth some of these things actually meant. And I'm very pleased to see that in the red print, you've added in certain disclosures, what they mean. I still do have a slight wonder whether the McLeod position is something from the Kama Sutra or indeed a chess. But I would be grateful that when you're doing these reports, which we have to digest as mere mortals, it is really important that we do understand what you're talking about. And if need be, a sort of separate glossary may be helpful, but we do need to be able to understand it. They are quite complex, and we appreciate that these are within the jargon of your and the language which you use every day. But thank you on that. I'm a bit confused by these timelines, and I'm glad you made the comment as you've just done, because there's one or two things in here which sort of came up last week. There's one that came up yesterday and was solved. And I'm finding myself sort of going, you're giving a particular comment on the state of play at a point in time, which a day later might not apply, but the world, the public will think, well, gosh, what's going on? So I'm a little bit confused about that. And I mean, the particular one that I was looking at was on page 42, I think it was. Sorry, I'll have to just flick through these things. Cabinet member for infrastructure and transport proposed that a progress review, etc. Actually, I don't know that that's actually true. And anyway, I think they've reported. So it's a sort of one of those things where you've got a qualification as a construct based upon something that's there. But I'm not sure, and I'd look to Andrew here, who might be able to remind me, but I'm not sure. Actually, I think we do have Councillor Harvey, do we not, online? So she may well pick up on that, because I think it's something which I'm not sure that's actually true. But I raise that as something perhaps that we just need to look into before we actually agree that this is a fit and proper report. Materiality, thank you. That was really helpful to understand that. And I'd be just grateful that we can be sure that what's been added in red actually does match the reality of the moment.
Andrew.
Thank you, Chair. Just to pick up on the point about the comment about the 6 months review, the report you've got in front of you is correct. The report came to Cabinet in September last year. The response came back to Cabinet yesterday, so that was more than 6 months. The reason for delay, as we explained in the Cabinet paper, was there was a whistleblower incident and time was taken to conclude that. So I agree with Grant Thornton's statement here that we didn't report back to Cabinet within the 6 months. And the reason being that there was a whistleblowing process that was in place. It's quite a complicated and protracted piece of work that was concluded, but that did delay the bringing back of the report update to Cabinet until that was concluded.
Thank you, through your chair. Thank you. I mean, this is a good example of where suddenly a report's going to have a particular point on it, but actually it's all been dealt with. Therefore, it seems to me that if we met next week, you would have been able to say, that's all done. If we met 3 weeks ago, you would have been said, no, you wouldn't. And I understand that, but I just wonder, I'm not sort of totally happy that how we decide the point in time seems to be debated on that issue. And this has been cleared up and has been dealt with. So I've just raised that because it seems to me that, this is a public document, the public's going to wonder what's happening. I think it's an extraordinarily important point on page 23, because this has been a subject I've seen of letters and all sorts of things going the rounds, in which you make the point that your own very report has been delayed because of COVID. It's not surprising that we find ourselves, having a certain amount of difficulties as COVID has actually interfered with the workings of everything that everybody's done. And there has to be some sensible approach to that from the point of view that, none of us have been able to do it. I'm sorry, it's on page 27, I think it is. The global outbreak of COVID virus has led to unprecedented uncertainty for all organisations, and everybody's tried to work as best they can, including your good selves. And you've made the point that, it's taken time to get there. So I just want to make sure that we don't reflect something that the council has done, dealt with, actually is on top of.
Yeah.
But it looks as though when you say you're not going to give a qualified report in that regard, I'm just uncomfortable.
I think I wouldn't dare speak in the defence of Basil, but when reporting post-balance sheet events, the date of the report post-balance sheet or post the events that you're trying to encompass, it will always depend on whether you publish that report on the Tuesday or the Friday. Events will occur in the interim. There has to come a line. I suppose the comment might be made that we need to be within the report very specific about when the report is published, and therefore any events which occur after the date of publication are not reflected in the report, which would actually encompass your comment about the report which came to Cabinet this week.
Yes, or if we're approving this today, we have to have an addendum in what we say that actually this was dealt with.
Certainly, we can comment. We can make that comment. I think that's fair. I don't want to. If John, you want to come back on that?
No, it's absolutely fair, and we have to work to practicalities, don't we? So when we draft a report, it's actually a number of weeks before a meeting, because we have to then share that report with officers. We have to allow a certain number of days to allow that to be considered, and part of the point of sharing with officers is to ensure factual accuracy as best as we can, and then it has to be published a week or so before the committee, so that members can have the opportunity. So things will happen between us drafting it and this meeting. So yes, I think it's fair comment that sometimes things will be a little bit out of date. But this meeting is the opportunity to bring things up to date, and the minute of this meeting will actually give that evidence then that the conversation has been had. One thing to bear in mind also in terms of our reporting is that we're reporting on the 1920 year, so the year end 31st of March. Now, what we would do is reflect on things that have happened after that year end regarding the issues that we're commenting on, but the adequacy of those arrangements that we're looking at is, were those arrangements adequate, in our opinion, for the financial year ending 31st of March 2020 in this case.
So not wishing to come back, but that I think is my point. Were those value for money correct in that year? That seems, these comments are coming in on things that have disclosed well after that year. And note that even that line says we'll come back to Cabinet after 6 months. It doesn't say within 6 months or at 6 months. Therefore, technically, I don't think that's correct. But I mean, I'm not going to go to the wall on it, but it clearly here we are trying to be an audit committee, trying to be correct in what we do. And I find that just difficult because it obviously has a political implication, but it has much more than that. It has a reflection on the council, on the workings of the council. And it's a very important word that after is put in there, when in fact it's happened, as indeed Mr. Lovegrove has kindly just pointed out yesterday.
Yeah. And the minutes of this meeting will record that the action has been taken by the council. Yeah. I've got Councillors Bartlett, Watson and Summers wanting to come in. So Councillor Bartlett.
Thank you. Thank you, Peter, for trying to tackle that. So obviously quite new to this committee now. So what you're saying then is that the value for money conclusion that's in this report for the previous year is because something that's happening now throws doubt on whether or not that was there.
No. what is happening now is giving us the evidence of the adequacy or not of the arrangements during the year that we audited. So the investigations, so for example, on the capital matters, the various investigations that have taken, the best part of a year to run through, those are telling us that the arrangements that were in place to manage the capital programme at the year that we were auditing it weren't adequate. And that's what we draw the conclusion. And similarly, the children's services case, which again took a number of years from the incidents happening to give us that feel for were those arrangements likely to be adequate or not during the year of audit. And we concluded that based on that evidence, the arrangements were unlikely to be adequate for that point.
Thank you. And then going forward, this will then be part of this financial year's work that you'll be doing to understand.
Absolutely.
Just come to life.
Yeah.
That's the distinction between what's in this being in this report now. Thank you for that clarification. I'm going to leave that particular topic now then, just for the time being, because I suspect it might come back up again. There was one specific question I did want to ask, and that was around journals. And so on page 48, appendix A, on journal authorization, I understand this is it's rolled over a year, and it's concerns about making sure that journal process does have the appropriate authorization. It rolled over because you still weren't completely assured. We now have a management response that says we will reconsider this recommendation, currently posting restrictions and authorizations outside of general ledger controls are in place. So does we will reconsider this recommendation mean that we are now, in your opinion, recognising and addressing this, or does it mean, and I guess this is for Mr. Lovegrove, does it mean that we will take another look and decide whether or not we're addressing it? So that's sort of the distinction between we are addressing it, or we'll take a look about whether we are addressing it.
If I can sort of give an answer to them, then maybe Mr. Lovegrove could comment on that. So journals in general are a sort of really important part of our audit approach. They're the area where you could sort of bypass other systems and controls in order to change the accounting entries. So we do pay close attention to them. And I talked about the regulator's interest in audit, and the regulator is very, very hot on auditors' work in journals. The management override of controls is actually one of the presumed risks that's in every single audit plan. It's considered to be that significant when it's in an audit context. So there is then, and we are aware of, standard systems that are in place in all organisations. A lot of local authorities have the same type of ledger arrangements. And in a number of those systems, the authorization controls aren't automatically built into those systems. Councils compensate by putting in place other controls to make sure that the risks there are mitigated. We follow those through, and we are satisfied that those controls were sound. Hence, we didn't qualify our audit opinion around the management override controls and the use of journals in this case. However, because journals is such an important inherent piece of work from an audit perspective, we will always comment if there is a basic systems shortfall in that area. So we will always raise this recommendation, even though we've also followed through that there are compensating controls in place. And we do that so that we're fully clear and transparent with you as a committee. It does, even with those compensating controls, it does represent a risk. So it's something that the committee needs to be aware of, and management needs to be aware of in terms of making sure that what you do year on year is appropriate against that risk.
And do you want comments? Because the question really comes to you, I suppose, are you satisfied with the authorisation of the journals? It's satisfactory.
And Chair, I am satisfied, and as John has just explained, we have a number of compensatory and other systems that give them that assurance.
Could I just ask you to move a bit closer to the mic?
Certainly. Yes, I am confident and I'm assured that the systems and alternative arrangements we have in
I'm
place.
sure your mic's on. Or indeed working.
Right.
Or indeed working.
I think we're not working.
I'm assured that the systems we have in place and conversation of processes do give me that level of assurance around journals. But what I have undertaken is to have another look at this issue. The challenge we face is that Business World is a very good system, and we very much use it as it comes out of the box, so we haven't made any local amendments. So the system doesn't allow this automatically. We can write our own amendment to Business World to allow this to happen. The issue that then brings is that it is a local amendment, and I would need to make sure that I'm completely confident that that amendment works, because I can't rely upon the work that Unit 4, which is the supplier of Business World, will give me that assurance. So I need to ask the team to go through that process to balance off making a local amendment. Am I confident that that will work? And will John be confident when he comes to have a look at it, that is working as it should? So that's the bit of work we're going away to have a look at. And we will see what we can do. It may well be we decide that that is the way forward, or we decide actually that poses another raft of risks that probably outweigh the challenge that we're facing.
Thank you, Andrew. John, if I can just get back to you, is this a common problem you see amongst a number of councils that you audit?
Yes, it is, and it's the consistent treatment. So we would raise it every time, just so that we're complete in what we say. We do look at those compensating controls, and if we felt there was a shortfall, we'd have further comments to make around those. So the absence of any comment there, you can get assurance that we've squared that circle off.
Councillor Watson. How are you?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I can hear and see you as well. And okay, I have a series of questions actually. On page 39, what is actually the further risk, the significant risk where we need to perform further work? I've not been able to pick up in the additional papers what that further significant risk is. So that's my first question. My second point is about the role of audit and governance, because on page 42 and 43, we've got a significant number of red lines. But now that I sit on as cabinet support and in children's, I'm learning that one needs to go back in order to understand the present. Now, I understand that in terms of the governance arrangements, are we satisfied that what has happened before with Blue School and with the Herefordshire City Transport package won't happen again? Because when we're looking at, like, the Blue School House had a swap report done it, there was an internal investigation in 2017, the Audit and Governance Committee received assurances that there was project management, financial control, and a change in culture. But as we're recently finding out, that's actually not quite true. And I understand that Audit and Governance members were allowed to sit on the project management control groups, and a report on the progress was actually brought to the Audit and Governance meeting on the 24th of January in 2018. But the committee actually didn't return to this. So I suppose this is one for either the chair, the vice chair, or the for Andrew Lovegrove, is that can we be assured as a committee that we are going back to make sure that we are taking up the actions to ensure that things don't fall through? And why didn't SWAP go back to actually then review what had been, is that, where's that? There is a failure. We've got level 1, level 2, level 3 in governance, and that's highlighted in the annual government statement. But it's about, for me, why wasn't the SWAP report asked to include audit checks that the processes put in place were robust and delivering change required as given by the chief executive? So, yeah, and as I said, I'd like assurance that our role as members of audit and governance is a tight ship. Thank you.
There's a lot in what you asked there. Can we just deal with the first question? I think because which out of the two is probably the more straightforward to answer.
First one is straightforward to answer. The risk was the Children's Services legal judgment being coming to light during the course of the audit. If you track back on our progress reports to the committee, we brought that to your attention in one of those progress reports to say that we had changed our value for money risk assessment to introduce this as a new risk. So that's the origin of that one.
Thank you. I think the second question deserves a little bit more contemplation, but as a comment in terms of the areas which have been raised by external audit relating to the Hertfordshire City Centre Transport Package and the children's issues, we have within the external audit work plan a number of areas which they are going to be covering to give some assurance that the failures which occurred, which caused these issues, have been addressed by the council. Now, I think we'll come on to that, but I think as an audit body, as an audit governance body, we will be looking to receive interim reports on how that work is going. And we will then also look at the work that SWAP has been commissioned with by the 151 officer to further investigate, certainly in terms of the HCCTP issues. We will be looking, I think, at that report in some considerable detail when it comes, and we'll probably ask for that to come to committee. I'm quite happy for any committee members to put forward either requests for further work that they can see is required outside that being done by the internal auditor. I think the external auditor takes a slightly different approach, and I'm conscious that we wouldn't normally ask external audit particularly to do work, but I think we will be very interested in external audits review during the coming months of what they cover and unpack and what they recommend. And we will be looking perhaps also at scrutiny's view of how changes are being made to governance within departmental structures. The point made about the SWAP report that came to Cabinet, I think in the project management report that came to in January 2018 is well made. I think I think we could ask SWAP to review their report. I'm looking at the 151 officer here, and to comment on why they think the issues weren't uncovered by the report at that time. It is, everybody's acting with the utmost integrity and honesty and in a professional manner. But it would be a lessons learned exercise, I believe, to uncover why these issues weren't discovered by what was a reasonably vigorous piece of internal audit work. I don't know if you have a comment on that, Andrew, and then I'll zip back to Councillor Watson for a comment as well.
Chair, but there are a lot of issues that I think you've highlighted there. Cabinet did agree yesterday for an improvement board, so that they will be taking a very close interest in progress and the lessons to be learned and what happened or didn't happen. And you said also scrutiny, I understand, will also want to have a look at it. And as you said, this committee will also, so I think that the appropriate close inspection and members keeping a very close eye on progress, I think is in place. In terms of the work that Cabinet agreed a week ago, we're just finalising the terms of that work. I've broadened the scope to it is an investigation more than just an audit, so it will pick up all the points that you've raised, and explicitly we have already put in there our SWAP to comment on the Blue School recommendations and whether they were or weren't followed in HTP, CTP case.
Thank you, Andrew. I can see Councillor Harvey, you've got your hand up. Would you like to comment?
Yes, I would. Thank you, Chair. I thank John and the audit team for the report that's been presented. I do, however, I do have to. I do feel the need to express some frustration in that most, if not all, of the issues that are highlighted are points of concern that this administration has itself brought to the attention of the auditors and has undertaken action itself to investigate and seek a resolution. I'd really like audit to be adding to our investigations rather than playing them back to us. As Mr. Roberts said himself in his introduction, government is expecting, greater rigour and detail in respect of audits that are undertaken. And Grant Thornton are wanting to have that reflected in the more detailed work that they do and the higher fees that are charged as a consequence of that. Looking back, as Councillor Watson has said, whether it's looking at the Children's Directorate and the persistent year on year overspends that have taken place in that area, what must have been indicating to auditors that something was amiss there. The frustration for us as councillors, whether in opposition or in administration, is that it's very difficult to go to the places that you as external and internal auditors get to go and actually dive into the detail, put your hands in amongst the paperwork, look at the evidence. We can't go there. It's beyond our remit. And, it's this audit function that, we rely on to get in amongst it and sort stuff out, identify things that are of concern to you. The auditor's twitching whiskers, it's instinct when you're out there sniffing about. And, you know, I really wish, both speaking as a councillor, spending years in opposition on audit and governance, and you know the number of times my feet ran with frustration under the desk, trying to, you know, get traction in terms of understanding what on earth was going on and reading between the lines of the reports that come forward to the committee. You know, my feet are running with frustration now under the desk. Thankfully, I've got a little pedalo thing, so at least I can get a bit of exercise doing it now under lockdown. But, you know, I'm equally frustrated in administration, in a cabinet role, that, you know, it feels like we're giving you our watch and you're telling us the time. You know, we need more than that from you if we're gonna, you know, get to where we all want to be in terms of, you know, an excellent council doing good work and delivering value for money for our clients. And I can cite an example. You know, there was a swap audit report in 2016 on the HCCTP project. Now, at that time, or by then, you know, only a year into the project, by then, all of the contingency and inflation provision for the entire programme, not just the road delivery, but everything else, had already been soaked up on covering overspends on land acquisitions that, you know, in total were not needed to deliver the road, but were you know, exercised under compulsory purchase order powers. Now, you know, there's no mention in that 2016 audit that, you know, the auditors were a little bit concerned that all of our contingency on this programme had entirely been used up right at the front end. You know, had that been something that, you know, and we couldn't see that, you know, in opposition, or, you know, it wasn't being shared by the administration, and in opposition, you know, we were asking for the detail on the figures, and it was just simply being withheld. You know, but you guys could have got in there. You guys could have seen that, should have seen that in the way that you were looking at, you know, what was happening on the project, and it just didn't come forward. And, you know, that's 5 years ago when we could have nipped this in the bud.
I think some points very well made there, Councillor Harvey. I think it's fair to give both Mr. Roberts and Ms. Gooding an opportunity to come back to you on those points. They might want to do that in writing. I'm looking obviously at John here, and Jackie's on Zoom. I'm just thinking of my timescale for this meeting. We've asked through the 151 Office of the SWAP to revisit their audit and to unpack why certain comments, which obviously the external auditors and in later audits have come to light, weren't noted at the time, because it is of concern. I don't know if, John, you want to make any general comment now, or Jackie. It's reasonable, I think, for me to give you the floor to come back.
Thanks, Jake. Yeah, it's you know, there is a difference. I don't want to be too defensive here, you know, but there is a difference between external audit and internal audit. Internal audit is more granular and is more you know, of a service for the organisation to actually go and explore in these areas. External audit is more on a sort of the line of last resort, and we also do have under our auditor guidance, which is set by the National Audit Office. We have a responsibility to stand back from the detail and look at the results of internal investigations and outcomes and the work of other inspectorates and so on. So it's a different external audit is a different animal than internal audit. However, on the external audit, if you track them back over a number of years, certainly since I became involved in the audit, probably 4 years ago, capital governance has been a feature of our value for money audit plan, and we've been raising issues around that, raising recommendations around that, considering whether there was evidence there that we were aware of that would justify us qualifying our conclusions or not. And we did give some sort of significant consideration to that. You might recall last year we actually delayed our value for money conclusion in order to allow further work to be undertaken because we weren't happy. We hadn't got to the point of being happy. We did get ourselves comfortable last year. So I guess what I'm saying is it's been a sort of a judgmental process over the years around capital governance, and I've sort of made that judgment each audit that my opinion wouldn't be qualified until this year, when I think the evidence was more weighty and more pervasive to be justifying that qualification. So we don't issue the qualifications lightly. I like the comment about following your watch and telling you the time. It's a comment used very often about management consultants, but in the case of the VFM audit, I think it was a good comment, because the VFM audit was deliberately set under the old code of audit practice to be a very high level type of audit, an audit that didn't delve down into the details, as Councillor Harvey has suggested. That if we'd have done that, we'd have been criticised for going beyond our powers under the old code of practice.
Just interrupt you there, because I was going to comment later that the regulations have changed for 2021. And could you just comment, are those changes significant?
They are absolutely significant, and for that purpose, Chair, for that purpose.
Would we possibly as a committee be find it useful to have some training on what's changed? So
very happy.
Value for money is pretty much centre stage at the moment with your qualification of the accounts. So
yes.
I'm anxious that everybody's then brought up to speed with what's changed in the regulations regarding.
Very, very happy to do that, Chair. I was going to cover part of it in my presentation on the plan that follows. The reason why the change has taken place is the relevant point to our Councillor Harvey's comment. Yes, it's changed to make the value for money audit more holistic, more useful as an audit tool. And as auditors, we absolutely welcome the changes, because we will now have much more of a remit to within the main areas of the value for money audit, which are still not everything, and I'll explain those later. But we still have now more of a role to actually comment on everything rather than just do a high level review of exceptions.
Thank you, and I will come to you, Councillor Summers. I know you've got a question. But Jackie, good if you want to comment on the comments raised by Councillor Harvey.
Thank you, Councillor Shaw. Can you hear me?
We can, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Harvey, for your comments. They're very well made. I suppose if we reflect back over the audits that we've done in relation to work under the capital programme, there have been quite a number of audits. Lovegrove House was obviously an investigation, and normally the very detailed investigation reports do not come in full to the Audit and Governance Committee. However, I know that Blue School House was shared with the Audit and Governance Committee at that time. As Mr. Lovegrove has said this morning, as part of our continuing work that we've been asked to do now on the HCCTP, we have also been asked to include a review of the recommendations and issues that were raised in Blue School House. Those recommendations, I know, having looked at them already, that there are a number that we know would have been repeated in HCCTP, particularly around compensation events, etc. Obviously, when we do raise issues in audits that we find, we do bring them to the committee as our more significant findings. And obviously, officers do agree those actions to take progress forward, to put a recommendation in place that will address it. I'm not sure how we can change the process to make it perhaps more obvious where the issues are, but I would welcome a conversation with yourself if you feel that there is something that we should do to perhaps raise the awareness more with the Audit and Governance Committee where we do have these findings.
Thank you. Yes. Councillor Summers.
Thank you, Chair. I might be a little bit off base, and some of this stuff has already been raised. You know, when it comes to auditing, there's usually red flags. In business, there's red flags. The red flag goes, you investigate a little bit more. I'll keep it short and sweet. Care of contracts is a concern for me. Care of infrastructure contracts and disposal of real estate contracts are a concern for me, and I'd like to know where we are with that. Are we researching now? For example, we have a shire hall, we have a town hall that are in bad state of repair, has been going on for years and years, mostly because we haven't put the money in to have them checked properly, but surely that should have come up somewhere online in the audits. Anyway, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Summers. I'm not sure where I go with that question. Possibly 151 officer might want to comment on asset management, or whether we wait for something.
It's about the contracts. I mean, the contracts, we have contracts set up, and I would imagine that they're looked at by finance people about how to take care of a real estate. Now, those should be stuff written into those contracts that are, you know, maybe they're 10 years down the road, but we need to have flexibility in those contracts, perhaps. But there are issues that we're letting stuff get away from us. Thanks.
So we can ask the 151 officer to take that away, to speak to estates, and perhaps provide a comment back for the committee on those questions raised. Councillor Summers. Right. I've got Councillor Ginman and then Councillor Watson.
Thank you. I just wanted to come back on the point that John made a moment ago, that he said a number of concerns over the 5 years. One of the problems, obviously, with an Audit and Governance Committee is that we've got new people. And I'm looking to my left at one who's only been here for a couple of meetings, and one over the way has been standing in today for one. It seems to me that it would be very sensible if John and Jackie were to put together a little list of their concerns that we should be therefore looking at, a sort of simple area list rather than bury it in anything, that we can then say those are concerns that we should perhaps concentrate on. I think sometimes, I mean, we've got 500 pages today to read. I think it's awfully easy to lose sight of what are your concerns, and a very simple list of those, so we don't spend 5 years and then hear after the event.
That's a point well made, and perhaps internal and external audit would like to take that away and consider whether that's an appropriate. It would certainly be helpful. I have to say, I mean, we as a committee were completely new to audit and governance when we were formed, and the learning curve is extremely steep, and there is no corporate history knowledge in terms of people who have been on audit and governance before continuing with audit and governance. Councillor Watson, did you want to come in on this item, and then I'll go to Councillor Watson.
Sorry, Councillor Watson, for jumping in front of you, but one of my questions around this particular point, that surely any of the issues raised by internal audit would go in our internal audit recommendation follow-up. report that we get, I think 6 monthly, from Paul Harris. So surely is this report falling down, because any of these outstanding recommendations should have been tracked within that document through to implementation and completion. It's only the priority 3 that we don't get specific evidence for their completion. So I'm a bit confused, because I think we should have been tracking these through that recommendation report. So either that report is not working, or we thought that they had been implemented, but in reality they hadn't. So that's just one thing I'm a bit confused about.
Well, I think that comes back to, are the actions from internal audit reports, what evidence do we have that they have been implemented?
And Jackie, please correct me if I'm wrong, but any priority 1 or 2 findings, they are part of a follow-up audit, so there should have been follow-up audits to address them. So I'm just, from a governance perspective, and Jackie, please come in and testify, but from a governance perspective, I'm finding it difficult to identify where the actual issue has arisen, because if you look at it from an end-to-end process, the processes that we've got in place should have captured those things.
They should have captured them. I'm conscious that some of the issues then aren't being picked up by the audit, and therefore aren't forming an action of the audit, which is part of the reason for going back and looking at the earlier reports by SWAP. Jackie, did you want to just comment on that?
Yes, thank you, Councillor Shaw. Thank you, Councillor Balderson. Yes, you're correct, Councillor Balderson, that we do follow up on audits where we have priority 1 or priority 2 actions, and the follow-up audit does come to you in that progress report, particularly if that action hasn't been implemented or addressed by the target date. And you'll see in the report today that there is a follow-up and main accounting, and there is an action in there that hasn't been completed by the target date. And I think in the last progress report that came to the last meeting, there were quite a few actions, and there was a robust discussion with the committee around the target dates, the amended new target dates for those actions. You're also correct, the 6 monthly report that comes through the performance team to you should pick up on those actions that haven't been addressed. We do not go back and revisit priority 3s. We do rely on self-assessment from officers to confirm the action has been completed. I know we've had a discussion around whether we should focus more on priority 3s. Obviously, that would be quite a mammoth task and take a considerable amount of the audit plan to do that. And the reason we give priority 1s and 2s are because they are the more significant findings that the audit committee do need to be aware of. I hope that helps really. It just confirms really what you've already said, but that is the current process.
Councillor Dalton, did you want to?
Yeah.
Councillor Watson, then I think we need to draw this item to a close.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. It was really just to come back, because I thought you were going to come back to me before Councillor Summers. So, and I'm glad that Councillor Jimman and Balderson have actually picked up my points, because for me, being a new member on audit and governance in May this year, May 2019, is that I'm just concerned that, as Councillor Balderson, have we got the systems and processes in place to make sure that we pick up issues, like what happened in January 2018? It wasn't picked up again when we came in May 2019. I know that we're very new to audit and governance, but again, have we got the systems and processes in place through the action tracker to make sure that our eye doesn't go off the ball? Because as Councillor Jimman says, these are heavy documents, like over 500 pages to read for this committee, and it's easy to lose sight of something, but the systematic problem is, you know, have we got the appropriate arrangements in place at level 2 for committee and scrutiny function? And that's what I'll leave it with.
Thank you. I think that's a very useful comment. So the recommendations that we are that a report of the external auditor attached to the data be considered, which we've done, and the committee to determine whether any issues raised in the report require inclusion in the committee's future work plan. I think we've asked for interim reports from the external auditor on their work. I don't know whether we ask for it here in this document, or whether we wait for the external audit plan. But I think it's worth noting it here that we would ask for interim reports to come forward, and that we would also recommend that the 151 officer considers asking that SWOP revisit the earlier audits on HCCDP, and in order to see whether there is any lessons learned to be learned, for the reasons that we didn't uncover the either the quantum or the potential quantum of overspends on those capital projects being reviewed. Have I missed anything out?
Sorry, my microphone's not working. I'll talk quickly. I think, no, indeed, but I think there were just a couple of minor actions which I noted during the course of it, relating to including glossaries for ease of understanding, about including the publication date of the external audit reports for clarity going forward, and also about training the arranged members and changes to regulations regarding the value for money audit, and also want a briefing note on the management of council estate.
If we're all content with that, can I ask you to make a noise in the appropriate manner? Aye. Thank you. So we'll now move on to item 8. We'll move on to item 8, the annual governance statement file for 2019-2020. Now, committee members will be aware this report was issued in supplement the day after the publication of the main agenda pack. And in line with paragraph 4.2.13b of the Council's Constitution, I think that the item needs to be considered at this meeting as a matter of urgency. I need to say that because it was late being issued to the committee. So the purpose is to agree the annual governance statement about 2019-20. Andrew, did you want to make any comments about it, or did you want to just take questions?
Chair, I'm happy to just take questions.
Okay, thank you. Committee, and over to you. Does anybody have any questions on the annual governance statement final for 2019-2020? Appreciating that that is in our terms a little while ago. Councillor Alderson.
I just had one point of clarification. Page, I think it's page 32 of our pack, which is Principle B, ensuring openness and comprehensive stakeholder engagement. Just one red line change, the second last bullet point. Whilst the council supports and advises suggestions from an independent person is the tightening of rules covering training, disclosure and complaint resolution for parish councils, doesn't quite English-wise make sense to me, unless I'm missing a point. So I think if this is going to be the final version, just a little bit of wordsmithing, I think, just to make that a bit clearer. But I have no other comments on this final version.
Thank you, Councillor Bolton. Can we ask that the officer responsible just picks up on that and make some slight adjustment to the syntax or the meaning as appropriate? Yes, sorry.
Chair, I'll pick that up as responsible for standards. I'll pick that up.
Thank you, Mr. John. Do I have any other comments on this annual government statement? Or questions? Then on. In which case, can I put it to the vote with the annual government statements 2019-20 Appendix 1 be approved? Thank you. I come now to agenda item 9, the annual government statement draft for 2020-21. As with previous items, this report was issued in a supplement following publication of the main agenda pack, and again in line with paragraph 4.2.13b of the Council's Constitution, the matter should be considered at this meeting as a matter of urgency. The purpose really is to seek the views of the committee as to whether the draft annual government statement for 2020-21 properly reflects the risk environment the Council is operating in and the appropriateness of any actions required to improve it. The draft is due to be published with the draft statement of accounts. I have to say that following examination of the document, even in a draft form, I felt that it contained a lot of inconsistencies and not just syntax errors, but errors of fact. I personally am therefore not happy to consider the document in this present state. I would ask committee whether or not they agree with my concerns and whether we should ask for this document to be reviewed again by officers and submitted to the September meeting. But I'm going to ask if that causes any problems in terms of the issuing of the draft accounts. I don't think it should do, but it's a statutory matter.
Yeah. What the Accounts and Audit Amendment apologies, Chair. The Accounts and Audit Amendment regulations, which came into force earlier this year, actually set a revised deadline for publishing the unaudited statements to the 31st of July. And that's followed by a statutory deadline for publishing the audited financial statements by the end of September, by the 30th of September. So
what we're saying is that although we're not, personally, and I'm not speaking for the committee because I haven't asked the committee all yet for their comments, I'm not very happy with this document. That because of the statutory deadlines, we would fall foul of a statutory obligation if we did not agree to publish it as a draft. I suppose I have to also reflect that it has been published and it is in the public domain now as a document in our papers. I've got to be guided by officers, I guess, on whether we can defer this item. And I think what you're saying is we can't. Is that right? I'm not putting words in your mouth, but.
Well, Chair, I know you're right that this has been published. It is in the public domain because it's part of the pack of papers for this meeting. Part of that process has already happened. If we don't publish our draft accounts, now the draft accounts, the accounts bit of it are published today, so we would not be publishing the AGS element of that. we are in breach of the regulations, as Kate has said. But if you want further work to be done, we can very happy to do that. You may want to convene a meeting before September to consider it, or we publish the draft as is, and we issue a statement saying that this is very much subject to further work, and revisions will be published as they're processed, or whatever the committee wants to do.
Thank you, both officers, for your advice. I suppose I'm going to open to the meeting for comments as to be guided by committee members as to what we should do. Councillor Jim.
Yeah, Chair, given and the comment we made earlier about the sheer volume of paper, and these arrived late as well, I think that we would be negligent in our behaviour if we were to actually approve this when you as Chair have had a better opportunity than most to actually and have concerns. I'm very much mindful of our legal duty. As far as I'm concerned, if you want to have another meeting next week, let's do that specifically around this subject. I'm quite happy to move with relevant urgency to deal with it. But it would be wrong, in my view, to proceed when you as Chair have made it very clear your position. And I personally am uncomfortable with the timeline I've had to try and read this.
Councillor Bolson.
Yeah, I think I would reiterate that. I've got 34 specific comments on this document, which I think I have forwarded to you already. So, yeah, so I would support having another meeting to perhaps go through this in more detail, and given how long our agenda is to get everything else signed up today.
Councillor Watson.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I agree with Councillor Jim and Balderson. I would like to know your qualified concerns with the report. That would be very useful to know as well. And could I ask, and I'm sure Jackie will laugh at me, in Appendix 3 for the significant partnerships, has anything been done about the local family justice board? It's on page 107, and it's of interest to me because of the current issues that are going on within children and families at the moment. And I have found these assessments extremely useful. And is there an update on the local family justice board, please, Jackie?
Thank you, Councillor Watson. The answer is I don't know, although we highlighted some recommendations around when we did the audit around the significant partnerships. Obviously, it's up to officers to address those actions. So I'm afraid I'm not in a position to update you on that. I can certainly try and find out for you and come back to you.
Would that be okay, Chair, for us to have feedback on that from Jackie or the officer concerned?
Yeah, absolutely, yes. Yes, you've asked the question, and you've been, it's been agreed you'll get an answer on that. If I can just go back to Kate Charlton and just clarify what is the so there's a statutory requirement to publish the draft. And what's the downside on that? Do I go to prison for a lengthy period of time, or if it doesn't happen, or what's the what happens if we don't publish it?
So, Chair, they do have to be published. We wouldn't have then the authority in terms of then publishing our final statement. What I would recommend is that the committee defer the matter to another meeting as quickly as possible, so that officers could work on your concerns and on your recommendations and revisit those as soon as possible within the next 14 days. You come back within the next 14 days and approve those within the next 14 days, because it does have an impact. And in terms of your later obligation, as Andrew said, we've got to publish now anyway. So I would say there needs to be an element of urgency, which I've heard all members, and I have heard members' concerns about this. But if we could come back very quickly to another meeting, please, I'd recommend.
So what you, so I'm just trying to unpack, you're saying we must publish it now, even though this committee wouldn't have confirmed that the draft properly reflects the risk environment government, and so we won't have considered it to be published before we considered it. Is that what you're saying? I'm content that that happens, but I'm looking at committees to say, well, perhaps we can have a very quick meeting, and I suppose it only has to be quorum. If everybody puts in any comments that they're concerned with, we just need a quorum meeting then to revise this draft so that we can publish a revised draft which will replace this draft.
Yes.
Am I understanding that right?
Yes, Jared, I would agree. You would note your comments today.
Yeah.
And then you would then republish a revised draft.
Thank you. Councillor Bowen, sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I presume you published it. There was a statement that the committee is unhappy with parts of it and would very much say this is a provisional draft and make that very clear. And then I can come back.
It does say it is, I think somewhere it says it is a first draft, but I think that the point's well made that on any, we'd ask that on any preface sheet or something that says that the committee has raised concerns and is working on a revised, working with officers to release a revised draft. Otherwise, I'm slightly tongue-in-cheek that we'll get a lot of comment back from public reading the document and raising issues and queries, but I think we want to, it will be viewed by certain people, and we want to allay fears that we're unaware of some of the issues which are contained within it. So if everybody's happy with that, so Councillor Ginman and then Councillor Summers.
Yeah, I'm content with that, but it does raise a question in terms of process as to why we find ourselves in this position. Now, I'm very grateful to external auditors' comments, as I've said earlier, that he said in these COVID situations, everybody, right the way through the top of government, is struggling. And although there are deep legal deadlines, and we appreciate they were put there at sensible times with suitable debate, but it is clear that sometimes this is going to be just too difficult. And if there is anything that we should have done in order to ensure that we weren't in this position, we need to know what that is, and we need to put that right. If, on the other hand, we have done all that is reasonable, sorry, there's a legal deadline, but I'm not comfortable signing off something which we're not comfortable with, because then we're in dereliction of our duty. So we're between a rock and a hard place, it seems to me, in those terms. The COVID excuse will be trotted out because it looks as though it's a perfectly reasonable one to use, and even our external auditor has said so.
Thank you, Councillor Ginman. Councillor Summers.
I kind of agree with Councillor Ginman. I put down blame COVID-19. We've been doing it for a year and a half, and let's may as well continue and get it right. Thank you.
Yeah. If we can form a quorum committee next week, that's part of next week, possibly, to review this.
Need 5.
Otherwise, you'll have to do it without me.
What's the legal position on it?
We need 5 clear working days. I'm just been told, yes. I will have to ask the Vice Chairman to chair that one.
It'll have to be the week after next, 5 days.
Yes, it'll have to be the week after next, and I'm away that week, so Yeah, we just need to have enough. If I could ask that committee members feedback as soon as possible any comments that they have. Obviously, I think Councillor Bowles has a fairly comprehensive list. I've a few short ones, but they really refer in a particular section. Councillor, yeah, sorry.
Thank you, Chairman. I wonder, can those general comments be circulated to the committee?
Yes, I'd encourage. So if we
I think they've done already, I don't know, but it will happen. I suggest that might be useful, and we can add our own, or amend any substitute. I realise that, but Councillor Matthews can add his comments there as well.
Perhaps if I can ask everybody to send their comments to the clerk, and then the clerk to circulate them, and then we've got some sort of control over who's seen what.
Yes, if I could just ask that they can send to Councillor Services, just so they don't
Councillor Services.
miss anything to remind me. Thank you.
Could I ask that any comments be made? Well, I don't know what the meeting's going to be, so I don't know when we're going to publish the document. So I don't know when I'm asking for comments to be made on it. Can I get some guidance?
Chair, is Ben able to look at when we might be able to have another meeting? When you might be able to have another meeting, and we can work back from that to see when publication might be, and then if the committee could then perhaps indicate who's available on that date, if that might help you, Chair. And then we can then include in the minutes today that it is your intention to absolutely revisit this, and we've got an agreed date in the diary.
Thank you. Yes, and if you could do that before the end. I'll give you to the end. Do that before the end of this meeting, and then to look for a date. Perhaps that gives you enough time, or colleagues enough time to try and find a date, and then we'll approve the date before comments to be made to you. So in terms of agenda item 9, I suppose what we're saying about that we note the item, and
I think you'll actually have to record that you defer the item to another meeting, because you're not noting it,
right,
because
okay.
of the contents. You're actually deferring the item to another meeting.
In which case, recommendation is that we defer the item to the next meeting at a time and place to be advised. All in favour? Thank you for that. Brings us on to agenda item 10. 2019-20 statement of accounts. This is to approve the 2019-20 statement of accounts and associated letter of representation by from external auditors. The recommendations that the committee is required to cover are to approve these accounts and read that the letter of representation, Appendix B, be signed by the chairman of the committee and the chief finance officer. So I will ask for a named vote, please, when we come to the recommendations, that you approve that I sign the letter of representation. Are there, well, Josie, I believe, is zooming, is she? Yes. Josie, did you want to take us through this this fascinating document and put some life and colour into it for us?
I shall try. So the 1920 statement of accounts was some time ago now, but as you have already received the external audit findings report, you know that the audit work on the accounts concluded some time ago. The position back on the 31st of March 2020 was that the council did deliver an underspend that year of 600,000 that was reported to Cabinet in June 2020. So we have got an increased general reserve balance of over 9 million as at the end of that financial year. So in 2019-20, we did see the COVID-19 pandemic start. So the first lockdown was the 23rd of March 2020, as I'm sure we all remember. So there are two impacts in the financial statement following that national lockdown, which saw the earmarked reserves position increase as at the end of that year. And that reflected the allocation of COVID grant funding from central government that funded the spending that commenced in April 2020. So there was some spend in March, but it was lower than the grant that we received. Therefore, that we had a higher level of earmarked reserves. Now, earmarked reserves are reported to Cabinet for a review, and the next review is scheduled for September 2021. So that's when the earmarked reserves position will be reviewed. Obviously, we've had another year end since then. So the earmarked reserve position would have moved on again from the position that you'll see in the 1920 accounts. I think the other thing to bring to your attention as a result of COVID in 1920 was that there was a note in the accounts that we haven't seen before, which is that the asset valuations in relation to our plant, property, equipment and our share of the pension fund were issued that they could be materially uncertain as at the 31st of March 2020 in direct response to the potential impact on the economy of COVID-19. Now, the note was made under precaution just to highlight to users of our accounts of the uncertainty, and I'm pleased to report that this uncertainty has been restricted in the 2020-21 accounts, as already mentioned, that are being published today, to assets in the retail and car park industry rather than the whole asset base. So an uncertainty still exists, but it is certainly more contained than the position that's reported in these accounts before you for 2019-20. I think that's the only highlights really from the 2019-20 accounts. The report and obviously the appendices go into a lot more detail, so I'm very happy to pick up any questions that anybody may have.
Okay. Yeah, we've got Councillor Bartlett, and then Councillor Watson.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, just on the report itself, paragraphs 29 to 32. I'm unhappy that we're just giving a date and not a year for these periods of inspections and what have you. That needs to be completed. That's in the officer report itself. So, for example, paragraph 29, this was completed on the 26th of June. Well, that's all very well and good, but was that, which year was that? So can we just make sure that we square that away with paragraphs 29 to 32? The other thing that I found interesting, listening particularly to Councillor Summers talking about the state of our PPE, which took me a while, I must admit, because when I first started in audit governance, I thought, my goodness, we've got an awful lot of personal protective equipment. I hadn't realised that PPE was for property and that until I got into this report. So I take Councillor Summers' point. You know, we value our estate, but do we always make a note of its depreciation as in audit? And that's an audit question in terms of what we audit. Is the depreciation something that we should know?
Thank you for the question. That there is both a revaluation reserve in the accounts, and depreciation is taken account of However, the buildings are revalued on a 5-yearly basis, is it 5 years? Andrew nodding his head. And therefore, there's also a revaluation reserve. Is that right? Yes, I'm getting bothered again. And that all becomes very, very complicated. I think where Councillor Summers was coming from was putting an actual value on the quality of the plant, the property and the equipment, which can only really be done through sort of a RIC survey or a mechanical engineer survey through the sort of RICS Blue Book process. Now, I don't believe that we do that. It's probably a question of the external auditor in a way as to whether that should be done once in every 20 years or so. It's an expensive process, I know, because I've been involved in one. But otherwise, the values are those values put on buildings by a surveyor working with the valuer. So again, would be presumably a RICS qualified. So they're professional values put on things, but I'd come back to the external auditor perhaps and say, does he see other councils doing a full Blue Book valuation on, presumably he knows the Blue Book?
Yeah, it's well, the standard for the council is the RICS Red Book. That's the one appropriate, and that is complied with by the valuer. The 5-yearly cycle does require, a professionally qualified valuer to look at the actual individual assets, to form a view on the assumptions around those individual assets to come to that valuation estimate. It's a really timely challenge because next year, the new auditing standard ISA 540 actually requires you as a committee to have a full understanding of all the estimation processes that the council has followed, including the evaluation of property, plant and equipment, and the pensions liability as well is a big one for you as members to get comfortable with how those valuations are performed. The point about obsolescence is a really interesting one when it comes to those individual assets. So you need to understand exactly how the valuer has modelled that obsolescence. We do challenge through our audit. We spend, when I said about the regulator asking auditors to do a lot more work on property, plant and equipment, it's one of those key areas that we've been really doing a great deal more work. We don't hear, but occasionally we do engage our own valuers to challenge the authorities' valuers. So you have two sets of valuers in a sort of a standoff there. But yeah, it's an absolutely key area. It's the biggest numbers in your accounts, and judgmental numbers, estimates. Really important that you understand what's behind them.
My blood ran a little bit colder when you said that. The standard is changing, and that we're going to have to encompass that within our remit as well. Some more training, I think, for everybody. I've got 2 more questions. Councillor Watson and then Councillor Summers, if I can. Order, and then Councillor Jim.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yes, my questions relate specifically to page 76 and 78 of the report. I'm a context person, so I really enjoyed reading the introduction to Herefordshire, because it really sets the scene of the challenges that we have in Herefordshire, being a rural county and not really being given the funding that we truly deserve, but from central government. But on page 77, it's this underspend of 0.6 million, 600,000. my trouble is that we've got an aging population. We can see on page 77 on the top paragraph that the cost of community care packages had, as part of the reduction, but we still have a demand through children and families, through our looked after children, and about the care that we spend on that. But as it's been pointed out to me, is that when people are asking about the ring-fence 3% council tax uplift for social care, but yet adults and communities can underspend on their budget, it doesn't make sense. And yeah, I'm sure that it feels, I think, to members of my ward, and we have a high, a higher demographic of older people retiring out here, but it really doesn't make sense. What we say is saying, yes, we've got an underspend, but we've got an overspend somewhere else. So are we taking from one pot to pay another pot? And the other question that I had about the financial pressures of 18.5 million on page 78 is that, we really do need additional funding from central government to enable us to put the infrastructure in place to deliver services that our population deserve. And my third point is, and I'm very glad that Grant and Thornton's raised it, I have to say on page 79, I was really shocked to see, and I quote, Herefordshire's proportion of the net deficit on the Worcestershire County Council Pension Fund as of 31st of March 2020 is 259.5 million, whereas this deficit does not have to be met immediately. It requires recovering over a period of future years. Well, in the years of austerity, I just don't know how we're going to achieve that. So they're my 3 points. Again, the underspend of 600,000, the financial pressures, and about this pension pot deficit of 295 million.
Thank you, Councillor Watson. I turn to Andrew, perhaps, to deal with the allocation of social care preset and how that is allocated in terms of the adult funding.
Thank you, Chair. The financial outturn for 1920 was reported to Cabinet in June 2020. So the accounts are reflecting what has happened, historical document. We were fortunate, if that's the right phrase, as an authority for that year to have a small underspend on the adult social care budget. Lots of other councils overspent. But we didn't. It was a very small underspend in relation to the size of the adult social care budget, but it was a small underspend. I recognise that. The Director of Adult Social Services, if he was in the room, would make the point that it's very difficult to balance your budget to the penny, given the nature of those type of services, because they're very much dependent on people's needs and the services they either request or we have to provide to them. So it's quite a moving target in terms of balancing your budget on there. So this report is reflecting the actual outturn that was debated at Cabinet on that. In terms of the allocation of the budget, that's agreed by full council, and that includes the adult social care precept, but that's appropriate, and that is allocated fully to social care that direction of the council. So this report is just reflecting what happened during that year. I appreciate it's a little while ago on there. So this is just a reflecting of the facts that happened during that period. So that point's there. In terms of the pension deficit, we could spend an awful long time about the pension, and maybe that's something we need to pick up as John from Grant has pointed out. We need to run a number of sessions so you are completely comfortable about the assumptions being used. on there. But as that says, the deficit has to be paid over a number of years. And for a lot of people, that isn't due. So myself, I'm a member of the pension fund. They've calculated what it would cost to pay all of my pension when I retire. That's what the deficit's come from. I'm not of retirement age and I'm still working. So I would expect the contributions to be made to deal with that deficit. And the investment committee will also, if they were in the room, would make the point that they have a historic pattern of outperforming the actuaries' assumptions about their investment performance. Now, we all know that historic performance isn't guaranteed future performance, but there are a number of assumptions the actuary has to take, and they're quite cautious in them. So it's not unusual for the pension fund to have a deficit of this nature, and it is very much a snapshot in time. It'll depending on where the stock markets were at the end of March. That's how they do the valuation. So the one thing we can say, I think it's as Councillor Ginman mentioned earlier, that the next day it will be different. So this is an example of where a snapshot in time produces a number, but the one thing we can guarantee is that as life moves on, that changes. It will go up and down depending on where the stock market investment will is.
Could you just give an indication? I'm trying to remember, but in terms of the deficit, what proportion that is of the whole?
I think the fund was over 90% fully funded. I would have to check on that at that point in time. So that is a good position from a pension point of view. And there are some pension funds that their deficit level is quite significant on that. There are some funds that are fully funded, but Heritage is at the top end of the pack, if that makes sense.
Thank you. Did that cover the points you raised, Councillor Watson?
Yeah, it does. But I must admit, if there's an economic collapse, I do. When you're looking at the global markets at the moment and seeing what's happening in China and elsewhere in terms of, I'm very uncomfortable with feeling that you owe people. So, but thank you very much, and thanks again for answering the questions, Andrew.
It's useful to remember that the local authority pension funds are funded out of receipts for pensions paid in by their members and by the authorities, but also as opposed to the central government funds, which are paid out of taxation. There is no such pot of money to cover those. It's also worth remembering that in terms of the Herefordshire Worcestershire Fund, there's approximately 50 or 60 constituent organisations involved in that. So although we are one of the larger ones, we're not alone in that fund. So I'd recommend you looked at the Worcestershire Herefordshire Pension Committee minutes to learn a bit more about that. Thank you. I have Councillor Summers and Councillor Ginman. Is that right? Summers and then Councillor Harvey.
Thank you, Chair, and you were partially right about what I was thinking about as far as real estate. From my real estate days, the state of the real estate affects the value, and we have millions, I would imagine, in Herefordshire. And if we don't know what it's worth officially, then we have a problem. Now, I'm not sure how much central government looks at what we owe before we get money from them. But I know from being in manufacturing, used to mark down a whole bunch of stuff every year to get in line with getting more money if necessary. So it's what you own. Now, if we don't know the state of those buildings, then we don't really know what we own because we don't have a true value. So there is more to it than simply fixing it up or watching contracts. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Summers. The way council borrowing works, it isn't borrowed against assets. So other than, I presume, in a very specific commercial transaction that's possible that we raised. I'm not sure whether we're even allowed to raise money against assets. So the valuation of the assets is purely for the annual accounts. I can appreciate your question about, are those assets really the value that they appear in the accounts? And it's the 5-year reviews that underline that. And surveyors will be looking at the condition of buildings. They will be assessing condition of building and making a charge against. They will be, especially if building. We do have some buildings which are, I'm trying to remember the specific term. There's a specific term which says that the building is effectively a worthless asset. But it might not be so reflected as in the valuation in the accounts. It's taken care of then in a reserve.
We have disposals on the horizon.
Yeah.
And if those, what we want to dispose, if we want to sell it, those disposals look how they are in real time, how much they cost to bring them up to spec will make a difference to what we can value as what Herefordshire, the assets, how much the value of those assets are. So it's just, may not have anything to do with this one, but it is an issue.
It's also worth reflecting that the valuation is different for a commercial asset as to an asset that's in use. So again, the whole subject becomes a lot more complex as things go forward on that. Councillor Chinman.
Yes, I suppose, I guess in Councillor Summers' mind is that Town Hall is a very good example of something where it might have a value, but when it actually comes to it now, we've all learned that it's really quite such a viable asset after all. So, I mean, it's a pertinent point. And I think after COVID, we're going to find already that extraordinary changes in value of land and property occurring. So I have no doubt there'll be some quite different valuations. Yes, it's reassuring with regard to the pension point that our 151 officer, of course, is suitably invested in it. Does seem to me it can't be better to have a guardian of that actually suitably invested in his own right. So that point seems pertinent. Can I just ask, really my original query was with regard to a little point on the notes, where we've got borrowing costs on 1.3 on page 92. I noticed in that this will be applied to schemes lasting more than 12 months with at least 10k of annual interest cost associated with the project. I'm presuming this is a sort of standard accounting idea or form, but I just wondered, when interest rates are low, 10k of annual interest is quite significant. When it goes up, it's not so. To try and save or earn it, these little 10k start appearing everywhere, and I just wondered whether that got adjusted as the interest rates alter. It was a simple point.
Joe, I'm happy to pick that up. I'd love to have an army of accountants who could do the calculation for every single transaction. I'm not sure that's the most appropriate thing. So we have de minimis levels, so the £10,000, and that has been there for quite a while, and it's broadly in line with what most other councils do. I'm quite happy that we'll have a look at it and come back to the financial procedures and the various things this committee has a look at. But that's why we have a number, and you're right, at the moment the cost of borrowing is very low on that.
I don't wish that time be spent by the 151 officer on that. Thank you for the answer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It may be my rather skimpy readings last night have made me miss things. I just wondered, do we have a line in the budget for our buildings maintenance and also for our self-insurance? I'm thinking again of the town hall and the Shire Hall in particular, but it applies to all our buildings and such, and all our properties.
Joe, I'm happy to do that. When the budget is set, yes, there are lines in there for property maintenance and for the commission of condition surveys to tell us what work needs to be done on the buildings. In terms of insurance, we have a whole raft of insurance policies that cover things, and we do cover things that are in effect self-insured. It's quite hard to get insurance for wear and tear on buildings, and some of our heritage buildings are literally that. And in terms of, I think, property PP has been mentioned by a number of members of the committee. This council is blessed with a very large portfolio of properties that it owns, and they come with their own challenges because they all need maintaining. And as we're talking about the valuations, a lot of the valuations for operational assets, I think like schools, clearly you don't have a market value for them, but they're valued as a school operation thing. So the valuers tend to use a process where they look at what it would cost to rebuild that school rather than market value for a lot of things that we use. Actually, the market value only comes if it ceases to be used for a school and becomes, a change of planning policy. So to pick up on the point that Councillor Jim made, the valuations will increase, I think, in the coming years because the cost of labour and materials to rebuild properties is significant. So, and what we then do, if we're in a period of significant increase in those values, we tend to value more assets or bring that valuation forward, not in 5 years, to make sure we have enough of our estate valued each year to satisfy the generality levels that Grant Thornton.
Thank you for that. Josie, if I could just ask a quick question. Page 117 was the unused grants carried forward, and I think you've covered that. I'm presuming those are COVID grants. The increase in the funds from 6.6 million to 15.9 million. I believe that's COVID. Nodding, fine. Normally in a set of accounts, it's a more general question perhaps, I'd look and see an age debtors, not necessarily an age debtors list, but there'd be some comment on age debt, probably in the notes to the accounts. I didn't see anything, but perhaps I missed it. I would be particularly interested, and I suspect it's a question probably that the external auditors would cover, are age debts, certainly where they have been there for some years, and their quantum. And I'm conscious that at least while I was Covenant member, we had issues with age debts with some large national organisations with a local presence that hadn't achieved, where we were effectively balancing off invoices against credits, and no sort of end date ever seemed to come as to when a decision to be made, either to pay an invoice or to reach a credit. I don't know whether John would comment on that, or whether I could see anything in the accounts that reflects that. Perhaps it's something you'd want to come back to me on.
Happy to come back, but I can confirm to the meeting that the audit of age debts and the proper provision against those age debts is an important procedure that we follow.
Yeah, it's assuming that some of those there is always a presumption made that bad debts never occur with national organisations, but when the sums involved become large, then there's always an uncomfortable situation with that, and I'll leave it at that. But I'd be interested to get something back on that and the sort of quantums which are involved. Thank you. If there are no further questions, can I ask, therefore, that we approve the statement of accounts by just saying aye. Aye. Can I ask for a recorded vote that I should sign the letter of representation as Appendix B? Because if I'm putting my name to it, I'd like you to
I think it's 1 o'clock as well. I think.
I just
All
think
for
it's-
one and one for all.
I just think it's appropriate.
We're right behind you.
Just going to hand to the clerk.
Yes, Chair, if I go through in alphabetical order, not that that leads you to the end. Councillor Bartlett. 4. 4, thank you. Councillor Bolson. 4. Thank you. Councillor Bowen.
4.
Thank you. Councillor Jimmon.
4.
Thank you. And Councillor Summers, sorry.
4.
Councillor Shaw. 4. So that's unanimous.
So we can sign that off. Thank you, everybody. Would the committee want a 5-minute comfort break at this point? Yes, please. Okay. Can I suggest we try and assemble at 12:25? Just keep it at 5 minutes if that's possible. Thank you to those either on the Zoom or watching on YouTube. Seen that comfort breaks tend to take a little bit longer in a real life meeting than they do while you're on the Zoom meeting. I'm going to now turn to agenda item 11, the annual external audit letter 2019-20. And the purpose for this is the committee received the external annual audit letter 2019-20 and determine whether further action or inclusion in the committee's work programme is appropriate. I'll ask John if he wants to draw our attention to any items in this.
Thanks, Chair. No need to labour the document. It's a summary of the audit findings report that we've had a detailed discussion on earlier. Annual audit letters used to be important documents. They were the only time that an auditor ever addressed members was through the annual audit letter, and with greater engagement through audit committees and audit findings reports and so on. Now that's no longer the case. This is actually the last annual audit letter you'll see because they've been scrapped. So for that reason.
One less agenda item for the future. That has to be followed. Does any committee member have any questions on this document? No? Right, then I'll just bear with me while I just check my notes that I've got. I've just got a quick query on page 199. Apologies if this goes somewhere else. Money statement.
Same thing.
It's the same issue as before. In fact, I think I've answered my own question. So we'll ignore that. Sorry, Councillor Jimmon.
Yeah, exactly. I was going to say the same thing. Right. This actually covers the very point that we're talking about, because value for money consideration. We have the same line in here, which occurred in the previous situation on page 200, I think it is. Cabinet member for infrastructure and transport proposed, blah, blah, blah. And we need to cover it by the very least in due deference to him. That has been presented to Cabinet. So I think it is fair to comment that thank you, noted, but actions have occurred.
Yeah. And Councillor Watson.
No, I've got nothing else to say. My comments have already been made by Councillor Jimmon. Thank you.
Thank you then. In that sense then, the recommendation with regard to the external summary letter 2019-20 attention to say committed to doing any further actions, with no further actions or including the work programme specifically in this document. Can I have agreement? Thank you. Item 12, the external auditor's annual plan. Again, this is to review and agree the external auditor's annual plan for 2020-21. John, I think you wanted to comment on this.
Thanks, Chair. And it flows on from the audit findings report from the previous year. So a lot of the issues you'll see segueing into how we're treating them in the 2021 audit plan. It's a plan that delivers the statutory audit under the Code of Audit Practice, so it covers value for money and financial statements. It's also important. Good comments were made earlier on about, well, how do we know if we don't have corporate memory? How do we know what the external auditor thinks is important? Well, the plan is the risks where we set out in the plan are the things that we currently think are the important areas, for tailoring more close specific audit attention to. There's a couple of changes in the audit. The Code of Audit Practice changed auditors' responsibilities, and I'll draw your attention to those. One was the scrapping of the annual audit letter. That is not going to give you time off, though, councillors, because that's being replaced by the auditor's annual report, which is the value for money audit set out in greater detail, greater depth, greater coverage, whereby we don't now give you a sort of a pass or fail binary type assessment of specific report by exception, that the risks that we've done under the new Code of Practice. We give you a narrative report. We don't do the pass or fail qualification, but we do give you indication as to whether we found significant weaknesses and make key recommendations. So those are new under the code, but the narrative report will cover all areas of the Code of Practice then. So it'll be a more sort of holistic and comprehensive document for you to see the results of our work. That is reflected in additional cost as well. The more work will be undertaken is reflected in about a 20% fee variation, which we're suggesting in the document. The other big change is the auditing standards on estimates. So estimates are the areas of subjectivity within your accounts, and under the estimate standard now we have to do more work around those, but it also gives you more responsibilities as an audit committee to be familiar with the way the council's estimates are compiled. So the models that are used, how the council uses its experts to inform those estimates, the degree of subjectivity and judgment that's gone into them, so the estimation uncertainty that's reflected in your accounts. And I've seen a number of councils that are now doing member training in this area, getting the key estimates being property valuation, that's the big one. Pensions is another important one. Provisions, things like that. All carry with it judgment, and councils have brought, for example, their valuers to speak to the audit committee to explain how, as a valuer, they compile the estimates. They've got the actuaries to come along to explain how the actuarial process works and what you as a committee needs to be most in tune with around those estimates. So those are the big new things that are in the audit plan. I mentioned fees in my introduction to the audit findings report. The subject of fee variations is now sort of well rehearsed. We're trying to be clearer with you by putting our estimate of what the fee variations will be at the outset in this plan. We've already been in conversations with PSAA to make sure that what we're proposing is fair and reasonable, but clearly they won't come to determine those fees until after the event. What they've done and the estimates that are in here, they've confirmed that those are in line with their expectations, they're in line with what other firms are doing. Also, on good news is that government has recognised that audit fees were too low, that fee increases are required, but it's also funding those fee increases. So it's set aside £15 million to distribute to councils to pay for increased audit costs. Now, £15 million across local government in England doesn't sound a lot, but it's actually 60% of external audit fees. So you can see that the 15 million equates to the fee variations that we're setting out in this document. So it's already strong.
Thanks, John. I've got a few questions. I suppose covered the revised code and said we'd like training on that, and it sounds like we need a visit from our valuers and our actuaries as well to bring us some skills and information. An open question really to the committee is, and perhaps the 151 officer, is that are we satisfied that the risks and the risk responses identified on pages 229 are correct? Is there anything missing? A wider question, probably which can't be answered until the September meeting, is are the risk registers now reflecting these risks which have been identified by the external auditor? That's both, I suppose, the departmental risk registers and quite potentially the corporate risk register. And one specific one, I suppose, for the 151 officer and the external auditor, in terms of the fraud risk assessment, pages 250 to 255, were these findings confirmed with our counter fraud specialist? It refers to work with management, I think, or some such phrase, but I'd be particularly interested to know if our counter fraud specialist had been sort of instrumental in feeding into the external auditors. How do you handle all of those? Probably the first question is for the whole committee, and we'll committee member can chip in and do something with that in a moment. But perhaps the question in terms of the financial risk registers, the corporate risk registers, is one for Andrew to comment on. I don't know, and the fraud risk probably for John. Can you come in on that, Andrew? Is the financial risks involved there? Are we content that?
Yes, and Chair, I'm very content that the what we see in front of you is a fair reflection of where we are on there. And I just want to add on the financial sustainability, because that is a very much a live topic for local government. A few weeks ago, another authority issued a section 114 notice, so it is critical. But this council is nowhere near a section 114 notice, and we keep that under review constantly on there. But as reflected in the paper in front of you, the council has its own budget challenges to deal with, and it's something that we keep a very close eye on. And I know you as a committee are included into that, as well as cabineters, and scrutiny are due to have a look at the savings that have been delivered this year later in their work programmes. Very live issue, but I'm satisfied with the fair reflection.
Okay, thank you. John, I don't know whether you want to comment on the counter fraud issue, or whether you're aware.
Absolutely, Chair. I'm just messaging my manager now to confirm or otherwise. I believe that was the case, but I'll get her to check. On the subject of fraud, though, one quite a really fundamental point is council's internal arrangements and counter-fraud service that you use would be really looking for, as the council being victim of fraud that sort of extracted fraud. So has it lost assets or has it lost cash through sort of fraudulent activity? Our questions around fraud are relating to, we're interested in that as to get an understanding of it, but we're also very much interested in fraud from an accounting perspective, being the deliberate manipulation of your financial statements. So when we're doing all our fraud work and when we're talking about journals and management override controls and things like that, we're looking at the risk that your accounts might be manipulated. So, that might be no one has enjoyed any sort of financial gain from doing it, but they've still distorted the reported financial accounts, and that's our audit responsibility.
Thank you for that clarification as well. So I'll open up to any committee members that have got questions to put forward. Councillor Balderson.
Yeah, I don't want to labour up too much, but just coming back to the fees. I was just hoping you could provide a little bit more information. I'm looking at page 233 with your detailed analysis. I mean, if I look at, I appreciate value for money, you've got an extra 25,000. Audit requirements for revised standards, another 20,000, and then local risk factors, 5,000. So I'd like to better understand what this local risk factor element is, but also recognising that essentially this represents around over 50% of the original fee that was agreed with PSAA of 96,000. So it is quite a large portion. Is that, given the amount of work that goes into that 96,000 to do the whole audit, it seems rather large. So are you saying that there is a substantial amount of work that reflects that being over 50% of the previously agreed fee? And then just a little bit more information about what this local risk factor element is. And then you do further up have a new standards element for 2,500. So is that different to the requirements around the standards further down? So sorry, a few detailed questions just to improve my understanding.
Okay, so I'll take the general point, which is the quantum of work, and yes, the quantum of work has definitely increased, of the magnitude that we're talking about. The Financial Reporting Council is our regulator. It holds our license in its sort of decisions on the quality that we undertake, as it does with all the firms. And I said in my first introduction that yes, they've expected audits to be a lot bigger, a lot more intense, a lot more time from senior people as well, which also impacts on the scale there. But local, and this work is called local audit. It's undertaken under the Local Audit and Accountability Act. So local audit fees have started falling against comparative audit fees in the commercial and in the central government world over a number of years, and that was commented on by Sir Tony Redmond in his review of the local audit market. And there's actually a graph in that review that shows that the fees for central government audit going up and the fees for local audit going down, and so hence over time you've got quite a big magnitude of shortfall there. And for local audit, which is very much a vulnerable profession to be in, I think, in terms of the lack of attractiveness of it for audit firms and for individuals. The conclusion from Redmond was the fees need to be rebased to get back to a level comparable to what the level that they'd slipped from. And government has recognised that and is funding it. So that's sort of how we've got there. I think that the tendering processes that had been followed had sort of encouraged a bit of a race to the bottom. And certainly our firm had been part of that race to the bottom as well. So we recognise that we sort of contributed to that difference in fees. But it all caught up when basically when Carillion happened, and that shone a sort of a spotlight on audit as an arrangement, and the need for audits to be more sort of more substantial and challenging. So that's the quantum of the fees. I'll just sort of try and multitask and remind myself of the explanation here. Yeah, the new standards, which is there's other standards as well as the big ISAs. So there's financial reporting standards work that develops as well. So there's a fee variation in for those. The big one that will be coming through in time is the leasing standard, how finance leases are going to be reported. So there's time in our audit plan for work around developing, working with the council really as the council develops its response to the new leasing standard. But there are a couple of others which I'd have to look up and get back to you on.
Sorry, John, is that IFRS 16?
16, yeah.
Yeah, because I don't think that when I spoke to the 151 officer, we didn't consider that had any great implication.
Not in the short term, but in the longer term it will do, and it's the preparations for it that need to be happening.
Okay.
The local risk factors, I'm sorry, I'm going to have to get back to you on that one. It might have been we just put a factor in there, a number in there as an estimate, thinking that it is likely that we will identify those over the course of the audit. But obviously, if we don't identify any, we won't charge any in the final reckoning.
Okay, great. And just one other point I wanted to note was that I think this document refers quite a lot to Audit and Procurement Committee. And I think
does it? Right, sorry.
It should be Audit and Governance.
Yeah, we're correct now.
Thank you. Councillor Dimmock.
You were talking about risks, and I noted the 151 officer talking about another council that was in difficulties. Therefore, I often wondered what our situation is with regard to Hoople, which is, I think, family in one way or another. And it is doing work, and it is part owned, I think, by other councils. Is that a risk factor that we're missing? And is there a risk factor in there, either in terms of both ownership, but also in terms of if we're doing work for them and if they're in default? So, and it just led me to wonder whether there were any others which, as a council, we either have partnership with or do work for, where there would be a potential for risk of financial loss. And is that picked up? And if so, how do we reflect that?
We'll come to look at the risk registers again in September. That's not to say we'll get an answer now, but that might be a point that we want to explore further in September. Risk register again. I know I mentioned people, I think, at the last meeting. There is meant to be a governing body, and we were looking forward to hearing constituents on that governing body. I don't know. The 151 officer is nodding at me, and perhaps I should let him take the floor a bit.
Joe, I'm quite happy to pick up on the Hoople issue. As Councillor Jim said, we own just over 80% of Hoople. It's a company, a technical company that trades predominantly for local authority, public sector. It has one or two commercial clients. It also does work for a number of other councils, and we're in the process of admitting another council in. They will acquire 3% of the shares of Hoople, and that's predominantly providing support for their business world financial package that we're running through Hoople on there. As you say, we picked up in the risk registers And it's also in the group accounts, so the accounts you've just approved. We do group with Hoople to make sure that if you read our accounts, you can see the whole impact of the Hoople part of the organisation. But it is a separate company, with its own directors and the like. And I think we've been undertaken to come back on your work programme to provide this committee with further information about how that operates, how it manages its risks, because it does do a separate company.
There are no others.
No, the arrangements like Hoople though. We have a range of partnerships that you saw in your draft and concept that talks about the partnerships, but Hoople is a unique arrangement.
Councillor Balderson on that point, and then I'll go to Councillor Watson.
Thanks. Just on Hoople, I know within our annual governance statement, we were talking about a project board being established to manage the council's relationship with Hoople. Is that something that has been implemented or will be implemented in the
It will be. We just wanted to get the decision finalised for the commission. So
that was unclear. Yeah, thank you.
Councillor Watson.
Thanks. Yeah, thanks, Chair. I was just going back to pages 217 and 229 in our pack, and it was actually something that you said, John, Mr. Roberts, about the HCCTP. Well, you didn't mention that one, but it's more about the fraud, because what I'm trying to understand is that when you say that under the governance, it's review how the council responds to the independent review of its public realm contract and review the council's response to the internal review of the HCCTP. But I'm just trying to get them clear in my head, because my understanding is that at the time, budgets that were set aside for the transport hub and other public realm improvements were combined into one budget, and is that action deemed fraud when it's a loss of assets if the individual budgets were for the transport hub and other public realm improvements? So will your review look at that, in the review of the review?
Yeah, I think that's the sort of territory that we would be interested in from the value for money side of things, looking at how your arrangements ensure that the regularity of budget setting and reporting is preserved.
Thank you.
Thanks. Do I have any other questions on it? Councillor Summers.
Probably me being a little dumb. I'm looking at COVID-19, an additional value for money, and asterisks, and it's added down below and factors not carried forward. Is that what COVID-19 is? What are we spending there? What is the 19,159 pounds for?
Are you looking at page 233?
Page 233, yeah.
Yeah, that would be, I think that's explained in the audit findings report. There's extra time and costs needed for establishing the remote working arrangements last year, for working with officers. There was sort of, obviously we were in uncharted territories around how long it was going to take to get information exchanged and establish secure arrangements and so on. But there was also extra time spent on then, potential risks around COVID. So implications on valuations, implications on estimates, implications of COVID on going concern going forward. So it was all the extra risk-based work that we had to do caused by the pandemic last year. We tried to capture that in terms of the time costs of it, and that's something that will go to PSAA to be scrutinised.
We expect that to continue as we come to the end of COVID, we hope.
Well, there is work this year on, certainly there's a lot of work this year on COVID grants. I think the COVID grants accounting is very complex doing the council's accounting for 2021 and the recognition of those grants. I think the arrangements, the team working arrangements should be a lot smoother now those have been established, and we'll gradually, I think, get to work this way as a sort of a normal way of working in future. So I don't see there being as big a challenge there, but there's certainly time that could come back in for COVID related, but we haven't included those in our estimate at this point.
Thank you for that.
Thank you. I've got no other questions. Can I ask the recommendations subject recommendations A, subject to any recommendations committee wish to make the external audit, proposed external audit plan and A, and associated forming the audit risk assessment that's meant to be approved. Can I show hands on that? I'm not sure we came forward with any other recommendations. I didn't determine any. So some actions certainly, I think, John to pick up on, but other than that, we have no recommendations, so I don't think we need to vote that we have no extra recommendations.
It'll be reflected in, sorry, Chair, it'll be reflected in the minutes and in the action log, so yeah, take a look through that.
Thank you. Okay. So moving then to item 13 on the agenda, the internal audit annual report and opinion 2021. The purpose of this report is to enable the committee to provide independent assurance on the adequacy and risk management framework together with the internal control, financial reporting and the annual governance processes by considering the head of internal audit's annual report and opinion and the element of assurance it gives over the council's corporate governance arrangements. Jackie Gooding, our internal audit manager at South West Audit Partnership, will no doubt have a few words to say on this. Jackie, if you want to take the floor.
Thank you, Councillor Shaw, and good afternoon, members. So this is the internal audit opinion for 2020-21. The head of internal audit is required to provide a written annual report to those charged with governance, and the purpose of this report is to satisfy that requirement, and members are asked to note its content audit opinion given. Members should be aware that excuse me, internal audit cannot review all risk and assurances relating to the council and cannot provide absolute assurance on the internal control environment. Senior management and members through the various committees are ultimately responsible for ensuring an effective system of internal control. Just as in more normal times, audit work has been planned to ensure that sufficient assurance will be available to support the annual opinion. Professional requirements of the public sector internal audit standards have remained unchanged, and in line with these, new audit priorities to cover the risks from the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic have been agreed throughout the year, and that work supports this opinion. As in previous years, the internal audit team have found senior management of the council to be supportive of internal audit findings and responsive to the recommendations made. In addition, there is a good relationship with management, whereby they feel they can approach the internal audit team openly in areas where they recognise potential problems. I would say that although no areas of significant corporate risk have been identified in the work that we've been completed, a number of findings around debt management and monitoring across various areas, and as reported in my last annual opinion, a number of findings relating to record of officer decisions have both been identified. Both these areas will need careful monitoring by management to ensure the actions are implemented, drive forward an improvement in both areas. Work has also been completed on the Hereford City Centre Transport Package, and a position statement was issued in September 2020. The position statement highlighted a number of issues, the main issue being the raising of compensation events. Further work has been requested by the council, and the findings in this work will be shared with you as a committee. Having considered the balance of 2020-21 audit work, the audit opinion from the work completed, and including the additional work as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic, I am able to offer a reasonable assurance opinion in respect to the areas reviewed during the year. Happy to take any questions, Chair.
Thank you, Jackie. So, any looking at committee, any questions? The Bolton.
Thank you. I've got a couple of questions. The first one, I was really pleased to see on page 10 or page 282 of our pack that a one-page audit report has been introduced that summarises all the key messages of the audit, and that the feedback has been extremely positive. So I guess this is probably more, this is something that I've really been keen to have introduced. So I'd be, I'm not quite sure whether section 1.1 officer in terms of management board has any comments, because this is something that I haven't yet been able to see at audit committee level on how they've found this one-page report.
I think it's been well received by management board, and it's a helpful summary to enable senior people to get a snapshot of where we are. And it's something that management board is moving more towards a one-page summary approach to enable people to see that the key issues on there. We've had a few teething problems. Like the paper I asked for recently was on one page. I didn't find the size of the paper, so I got an A3 piece of paper, but it's work in progress.
Because one of the things that I would be really keen to see from a committee member is, and I appreciate that you may not be able to include it in the public pack, but as the internal audit progress reports come to us, it would be great to get these one-page reports, maybe as an appendix. What I find very difficult is I don't understand the scoping of particular audits, and then we only see those that have got priority one, and we only see priority 1 and 2 recommendations. So it would give me a better understanding of sort of the work that has been completed. And so whether that is a possibility, Jackie, that we could perhaps introduce going forward, I would find that extremely helpful. I know it might add to our reading load, but I think we could potentially cut down the size of the update report. There's probably a lot of duplicate information in there that we don't necessarily need to read at every meeting, but supported by these one-page summaries, I would find that extremely helpful. Not quite sure what other members feel on that, but that's my first point. My second question was in relation to page 285, in terms of the summary of internal audit work done under 2021. I appreciate that the capital programme, capital projects report is still in draft and the actions are yet to be agreed. But this is where perhaps just one-page summary would help me, because it's looking like that this is going to be a reasonable opinion, yet we've had an external audit qualified opinion on value for money in relation to elements within our capital programme, capital projects. So I guess, Jackie, are you able to provide some? I appreciate this will be coming down in a future update, but at this stage, can you just provide a better understanding of this to me about the scope, just because it feels that it's reporting something quite different to what external audit have just reported to us.
Yes, thank you, Councillor Balderson. So firstly, we did report on value for money in our 1920 annual opinion report. This is our 2021 opinion report. And the reason it's not recognised again in here is because I've talked about the work on the HCCTP, and that work is ongoing, and that report will come to you, as you're aware, once that work is completed. We have only just been asked to do that piece of work, so although we've started some preliminary work on it, it's obviously not in full flow at the moment. In relation to the audit you're referring to on the capital projects, And that scope of that audit is to look at the actions that have been put in place or should be putting in place to try and address the problems that have been identified with capital projects. So it is going to be more a report of a point in time, and we are aware that not all those actions are complete yet.
Okay, so this report will most likely address maybe some of the points that Councillor Watson was referring to earlier in the meeting, in terms of going back and understanding sort of what has happened and ensuring that those recommendations have been implemented.
That's correct. The council officers have put a lot of work in to try and improve the processes and to get a clear understanding of what is expected in relation to a capital project or capital programme and the lifespan of that. And they're trying to implement controls that will make officers go through various, to put it simply, to make officers go through various stages, and they can't move to a stage until that stage is complete. That's not been fully implemented yet or embedded across the council, but a lot of work has been done in trying to do that. So we are looking at it at a point in time and also trying to support and give some advice on that. It's probably not going to bring the conclusion that you're perhaps looking for, but what it will do is highlight where the council are in the journey of improving that process.
Okay, thank you. I've got a few more, but I'll leave to the other committees first, and then if they don't address them, I'll come back. Thank you.
So I've got Councillor Watson, Bartlett and Summers. Councillor Watson.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Jackie, again, thank you to you and your team, and also, sorry, John Roberts, I should have said that earlier as well, to your team at Grant Thornton for all the reports that we've received today. First of all, it's great that we've got no priority one audits, which is, really good to see. And I was just wondering, it might be an unfair question to bring on you at this point. We've got 12% limited, but how does that compare to other authorities, please, Jackie? Yeah, in the ranking, are we doing okay?
Sorry, Councillor Watson, I lost my screen. So in answer to your question, I can't give you the answer in comparison to other authorities, but we can certainly look at that and bring that information to you within our SWAT partnership, because obviously we give a limited assurance consistently across our SWAT partners. In relation to, which may be helpful, in relation to the previous financial year, there were 10.5% of audits that received limited assurance. So there has been a slight increase in the limited assurance audits, opinions, but there has been an increase in the reasonable and substantial to 54%. And in the previous financial year, it was only 39.5%. Partly that was because, and I think you could probably remember from the previous internal audit opinion, we did give a lot of advisory audits, and this year we've made an effort not to use advisory, but to give an audit opinion for our audit work.
No, thank you, Jackie.
Thank you. Councillor Bartlett.
Thank you, Chair. This might, and thank you again for all the work. This might be me not quite understanding the relationship between all of this and the work programme. And I notice on page 275, we've got towards the bottom, we've got, as a result of the additional work arising from the pandemic, agreed to defer some of the less urgent audit work to 21-22. There's some reasons why, but it doesn't seem to. Am I misunderstanding what is actually being deferred, or is that actually then what's being deferred is going to be in that table on page 284, where it hasn't got any some bits of it in progress, or they've got. Does that make sense? I'm just not understanding what's being deferred, and whether I'm just missing something or it's just a standalone statement. So I noticed it was in agenda item 8 as well, that anything that hadn't been completed would just roll over to the following year. And I'm just wondering where these things go. You know, how can they just roll over, or do they have a life cycle and they get seen and or they just drop off? Or does that make sense? What is it that's being deferred? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bartlett. It's a very good question. So as the impact of COVID-19 increased, and there was a change in the priority of our work. We had to do a lot of work around COVID-19 grants, certification, as an example. So some of the audits that were originally planned for the 2020-21 audit plan had to be removed to allow for that work to be completed. Obviously, we only have a limited amount of resource to complete the work. So those audits were deferred. There was a report that did come to the audit committee outlining those audits, and we did keep the audit committee up to date with the audits that had been deferred and at what point they were deferred, and the audits that were included in the plan in place of those. As part of our planning for 2021-22, we started with a piece of paper which obviously had the deferred audits on that plan, and we're discussing with officers as part of our quarterly planning process which of those audits are still relevant to be included as a risk in this year's audit plan. So some of those audits are already in the plan for quarter 1 and quarter 2, and some of those audits are still at discussion. And actually one of the audits has been removed because work has already taken place by officers to give assurance that where the risk was, that risk has now been mitigated. I hope that's helpful.
It helps. It helps with the explanation, but it still doesn't help me understand which ones you're talking about. There is no this is deferred, this is under discussion, this is dropped off. Does the actual title of the audit that's being deferred? So you've got a number of audit areas, you're saying, but it doesn't make sense. I don't actually know which ones are which.
Yeah, I think would that information not be in the quarterly audit update where you talk about the work programme for the coming quarter, and the annual update that shows the work programme for the coming year? Because unlike external audit, where we've seen what's happened, what's been done, what's reported on, and what the work is to come, what we're just looking at here is, if you like, the balance sheet. This is the work that's been done with a comment on the work that's currently ongoing. What we haven't got is, and this is the work programme for the coming year, which accepted will be in quarters now. Am I right, Jackie? I'm trying to.
Thank you. Yes, you're correct. The internal audit progress reports that come to the audit committee will give the information that I think you're looking for, Councillor Bartlett, into what audits have been included in the plan, and if they've been deferred, the reason for them being deferred. And that will give you an overview of the audits that we're planning to work on. This report that's before you today is your opinion. So we've only included the audits of the work that we did to gain assurance on for the annual opinion. So we haven't included all the audits that were deferred, but we have included the pieces of work that we did in relation to COVID-19 or any other additional pieces of work. So I think we're looking at 2 different reports. This is the annual opinion report, and the report that will come to you in September is a progress report. Will have the information that you're looking for in relation to the audit plan, what work we're going to do in the next quarter, and what audits have been included from the deferred plan from last year.
That's great, and that makes sense. So I just made a comment in then for the uninitiated. Could that last sentence then be put into the report to say, and that will come, that will be shown in the 20 September. You know, in the
I
September
think you're right,
report.
Councillor Bartlett. Perhaps I hate to add yet more words to reports, but perhaps a couple of lines explaining that information on the forthcoming work programme, and then you need to refer to the appropriate other reports. Yeah, but that would be helpful for somebody that's just reading this as a one-off document. I've got Councillor Summers on my list. Is that right? Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just looking at the equality of duty section, page 269, and we're doing very well on it from what I can tell, except we're not including mental health. And with the long COVID coming, that we can appreciate is at the end of this COVID situation, it is going to increase. And I know how many days are lost to mental health, and I'd like to see a little more emphasis put on it. Is there any? Because it does come into loss, etc. Anyway.
I think the section there is a statutory requirement.
It is, and mental health is statutory too.
I appreciate that, but what's written there is as laid down by statute. Am I right in that? Yeah.
Okay.
So we sort of mess about with it at our peril, I think is the answer. But it's possibly one that we could ask of statutory.
Well, we are going to look into, there is probably more sick days due to mental health through COVID, long COVID, etc. And I think we need to be aware, and we need to make it more obvious in-house that we will take care of it when it arrives. So there is still some stigma in-house, I believe. And I think we need to look at it anyway.
Yeah, I think the equality duty is something that's in every decision that we make. That's well made. I've got Councillor Watson. Just before Councillor Watson, I could just ask. I wasn't quite sure. It's going back to the HCCTP, page 287, CRR 38. I wasn't quite sure whether it's that report which is going to cover more work on the HCCTP and what comes from it. And I have a question that's a bit more granular than I normally ask. But I would be interested in determining the date on which any elected member of council was informed of the overspend on the HCCTP. And I don't know whether that is already something which has been covered by internal audit, possibly as part of the whistleblowing investigation, in which case it would have come before committee. But perhaps the internal auditor would come back to me on that directly. Is that okay, Jackie?
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Shaw. I can probably give you a quick update now if you would like. The piece of work that's referred to in the annual opinion is the piece of work we did, which resulted in a position statement. That piece of work did outline some significant findings, which you will be aware of. We've highlighted in our annual opinion today. The piece of work that we've been commissioned to carry out by the Chief Exec will include a review of the reports that to various committees and by various officers to have an understanding of what was reported at what time and to whom during the process. I think that's probably what you were asking for, is that correct?
I think so too. It's just that very specific piece of information. I think I'm conscious of a potential breakdown in trust between officers and elected members over the whole of this subject. And I think it would be beneficial for not quite a truth and reconciliation committee level sort of analysis, but just to understand precisely when information was provided to an elected member about the matter. I'll leave it there. I've got Councillor Watson.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, mine's a very quick one, and it is related, and I'm not sure if it's appropriate to ask it in this agenda item, but it's really about the public interest test, because as Councillor Balderson was just saying earlier about, as committee members, we often get reports that aren't made public. And as we've learned about the 2006 accounts, there was a confidential issue that couldn't be made public. But the external auditor seems to be, satisfied with the resolution. But whose decision is it to say what is public and not public?
That's probably for you.
Yes, so in terms of items that are public or not public, there's statutory guidance, there's statute that determines what items go in the public domain and what items are confidential, and that's included in a piece of legislation called Section 12 of the Local Government Act, and that sets out various categories of confidential information that remains either confidential and is in the private, is private, and rather than actually coming into the public domain. Does that answer your question, Councillor Watson?
Thanks, Kate. It does and it doesn't, because it would be really useful to know what those tests are. What are the variables that need to be achieved in that Section 12? And are we able to, is that a public document to see what's on Section 12?
Yes, that is, and I'm more than happy to circulate that to the committee if that would be helpful.
That would be very helpful for me. Thank you. Thank you, Kate.
Thank you. I've got no further questions for the committee, but I can see that Councillor Harvey would like to comment. So the floor is yours, Councillor Harvey.
Yeah, thank you. I was just wanting to double check the report on that's notified on page 287 of the SWAT report about the Hereford City Centre transport package. I think that is a swap investigation that was undertaken in the summer last year, following on from which there was an internal investigation, which is an appendix to the agenda item at yesterday's cabinet meeting, which was about improvements to major contract management. There is a new piece of work that has been commissioned by the Chief Executive, which I don't think is in the SWAT report before the committee, and is the one that was referred to just now by Mr. Lovegrove, I think. But that is a piece of work that is yet to be done, whereas this is a report that is completed. And I think there was also a question from either a member of the public or a councillor to Cabinet yesterday, which was seeking information on when Cabinet members were told about the overspend on the on HCCTP, which has got an answer there that's on public record.
Thanks for the clarification, Councillor Harvey. Thanks for that. If we've got no other comments or questions, Jackie, I didn't spot you there. Wanted to come back in.
Thank you, Councillor. So I just wanted to clarify something that Councillor Harvey has just said. So the report that you're looking at is the 2020-21 annual opinion. The HCCTP report that's referred to in there was not an investigation, it was an advisory piece of work. Just wanted to be clear on that. We produced a briefing paper or position statement, and because of the findings, we drew it to a conclusion. And as you will all be aware, there has been work ongoing since that. And Councillor Harvey is quite correct. The piece of work that we've been asked to do now has only recently been commissioned, but it should we cover all the questions that have been posed by committee today and also by members who were at cabinet meetings as well.
Thank you, Jackie. So if I could turn to the recommendation that the committee, having regard to the issuance of 5 by the annual opinion report 2020-21, determining potential items for inclusion in its future work programme. Ben, did we come up with anything?
Only in terms of other actions, which is colleagues at SWAP to provide a comparison of the council's position around assurance findings with other local authorities. Requesting that future work programme items indicate which items have been deferred or removed from the work programme at different stages, and also the circulation of the section 12 of local government elements that Mr. Charlton.
Thank you. If members are content, have a show of hands. Thank you. Which brings us on to the committee work programme. Which is fine for those of us with a piece of paper in front of us, not so fine if we're looking at a piece of paper, if you're looking at a small screen. Any comments or on that? Obviously, we will now be having a meeting, an additional meeting in July where we're visiting the document which we adjourned. We need to talk about that date, yes. So, if we can talk about the date first, the suggested date I think is Friday, July the 13th. Oh, sorry, August, July. Friday, August the 13th.
Would be on time.
Depends on a preference for morning or afternoon.
Morning.
Thank you.
In the morning, and I'll have to give my apologies for that.
Let's give them apologies for that too.
I think we may not have a quorum. Just hang on before you rush into this.
I presume Councillor Matthews or Basil will be there.
There will be some subbing by the sounds of it.
Something, isn't it?
Yeah. What do we need for? Yes, we can have substitutes for that meeting, and yeah, thanks. So we'll schedule that and arrange substitutions if and as required. I can get a substitute for myself if that's necessary. Councillor Bowen.
Might I say that the typeface, the print on here, really is there for eagles. I'm not quite sure for human beings.
Got by next year, which is
Not much bigger.
Just from the point of view, I didn't realise that. I'm sorry, but it is national practice. We should make sure they're easily legible, easily readable.
maybe it needs to go into landscape at 2 pages.
Yeah, if possible, but landscape over 2 pages. Landscape over 2 pages might provide a better for those of us that want to hear these things.
Sure.
Thank you. Sorry, Councillor Jimmer.
Just with regards to this date, we're saying quite blindly, well, we can all have substitutes. I'm just wondering how sensible it seems in the sense that people are actually okay with it. If we're going to have a virtual new team playing on the field on that day, including your good self.
Well, the point being that we will have made comments by that date. So the point of the meeting is to officially approve the new draft.
Yes, so they'll be voting on our comment.
Yes, precisely. I'm not sure in governance terms that sounds wise.
It's a team effort.
There seems to be very little choice though. And I'm sure Christie will be more than able to manage
She's there, she's there on this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
And
is
that's,
that, okay then,
from a governance point of view, are we
For-
satisfied that that's
for other
Right, right.
people to be
progressing?
It's,
present when looking at the comments that we put in and accepting or not accepting?
well, your substitutes really ought to read the reports as well and have their comments if they're here. I recognise your unhappy today about what is in today's publication. But if you're sending substitutes, they should be the ones that have got to approve the comments, have got to approve and present those comments. It is a serious issue. It's a statute, which everybody recognises that. I'm saying my position is that it's the substitutes really that have got to be able to demonstrate that they've understood, that they know that they understood what is being asked of them, and they can respond to any other questions about the comments in the reports, because they are going to be the ones that are going to be at the public committee making the decision. They will be accountable for that decision.
That's in mind then. Perhaps we consider the following week in August.
We go through one by one now.
I'm happy if the timescale fits in to. I was just going to ask if the comments are published, comments are published with the papers for that meeting in the same way that comments are on officer reports for political group representations, what have you. Would they then become part of the public pack that could then be recommended for inclusion by the people who were then assessing the government's report as well as the officer report that appends to it?
The difficulty is that you would be approving the actual statement. There isn't that it isn't you're not approving the comments. You're not approving your comments. Those comments are part of the meeting, and it's the actual decision on the day. It's the actual decision maker on the day.
But I'm sort of conscious. I'm working. Although I'm unhappy with that draft report as it stands, we have put a caveat on it saying that we are unhappy, that we will work on a review draft. I'm just thinking it's not going to change the world whether that review draft gets approved on the second week of August or at our next meeting on the 30th of September. Nothing is going to change.
And it's still going to be published.
It's still published. It's, having said it's urgent that we change it, I'm not so sure the urgency actually exists to change it. Bearing in mind that we will have new comments going on it, and we have a meeting at the end of September, which is being brought forward a few days. I understand if we are willing to bring it forward a few days from the 30th of September to the Monday the 27th. Is my thinking wrong?
Well, no, are you suggesting that it's published as it is with the health warning, if that's the right phrase, that the committee has some serious issues it wants to deal with, or do we delay publishing it until the meeting?
My understanding was we can't delay publishing it because of the statutory requirement that's published by the 30th of July, so it can be published anyway, but with the caveats that we're putting on it, saying that we have some reservations about the text and the context, and that we're working with officers to produce a revised draft. Councillor Summers.
Just the minutes for today need to go out to committee members because you have a couple that aren't here. So they will need to know what you're doing, I would think.
Well, that's even more reason for delaying the thing until the next proper committee meeting. I'm loath to brush something which seems, as Councillor Ginman said, not very much in the best quality of work for this committee to approve in that way. Would the committee be content for this? Well, the document will be published. So we asked for it to be published with a caveat that we want to see a revised draft in the near future, and we will have an opportunity then at the end of September to agree on the revised draft. Does that satisfy everyone?
From a governance perspective, I'm much more comfortable with that position.
I'm much more comfortable with that.
If you're comfortable, I think we're comfortable then.
Yeah. So there will be no. But I would still say, obviously, that we need to get our minutes to safely. That draft can be revised ready for the end of September. So just turning to the end of September, there's a request that the next scheduled meeting was to be 3rd of September. The Solicitor Council requested to move the afternoon Monday the 27th to assist with consideration of the rethinking governance proposals initially by this committee and then onwards to council. So I'd like to ask if members are content to reschedule meeting to the afternoon of Monday the 27th of September. Some of us are likely to be here, so
Doesn't make any difference to me.
Okay, so we'll say yes, thank you to that. Goes without saying, thank you to all the contributors to our audit teams, both internal and external, for their contributions today, their work over the year. Please pass on the committee's thanks to all of those in those teams that are working at coalface and doing some of the burrowing. Thank you to officers for organising the meeting today. Before I close the meeting, can I check the Democratic Services team that the live stream has now been switched off and that we are no longer broadcasting?